Hi everyone and welcome. We're in my wormery and today we're preparing to feed a couple of my bins. I've got some different types of vegetables and kitchen scraps over here for the worms, as well as my customary used coffee grinds. But before we do that, we're going to take a quick peek at my two bins that are trying to wind down and get ready for harvesting here. The one over here on the left, dated February 26th, has now become, as of 2 days ago, my oldest active bin. It's now at 195 days old, and it's been undergoing a horizontal migration to try to get the worms to evacuate out of the finished compost material and into this feeding zone area. And last time we were in here, we actually scooped out as many worms as we could, along with whatever material was in there. And we moved those worms into my outdoor composting bin, my outdoor worm composting bin. And this feeding zone was reset with some new fresh food and some new bedding and everything else. And the hope is that by this time, most of the worms have moved out of the material and into this new feeding zone. But we're not going to deal with this bin today. We're going to just let it continue to run as is, as we're going to do with this bin as well. They've been managed in the same way for the most part, except this one's a few days, maybe a few weeks behind in terms of overall age. But I just wanted to let everyone know that I now have a new oldest bin. And I mean, the fact that it's 195 days old at this point might mean that it could become a, kind of a 200 plus day bin before I finally get around to harvesting it. So I will take a look in those castings at some point, see if there appear to be any worms remaining. If not, I'm going to treat that stuff as finished, scoop out the finished castings, and then all I'll have to do at that point is really figure out a place to put the worms in terms of relocating them into a new habitat. Same thing with this one. So I really want to wait until both of them are truly ready to go for that treatment, and then move all the worms that come out of those two bins into one new bin that I'm going to start soon, hopefully in the next week or so. But that leads us to these two bins here. They're both in that maybe, I don't know, maybe 125 day old age range, if I'm not mistaken. And I skipped feeding these last time because I did peek into the feeding zone and I did see what appeared to be leftover food from the last feeding. So I did not feed these. So they're going on 13 days now since the last time they've been fed. And I think that's fine because these are my two bins that are full of old, slow composting food items, corn cobs and mango pits. And I do want to feed them today with some nice, soft, easy to eat food that can be broken down quickly by the worms. But at the same time, I'd also like to remove all that slow composting material from those bins and relocate that food to a different place. So let's get them up onto the, these trays up onto the bench here, and let's see how we're doing. Okay, so the first of the two bins that I'm going to work on today is this one, which is the slightly smaller of the two, but they're both the same age. They were both launched on the 3rd of May, and they were both fed last 13 days ago. And at that point, 13 days ago, the types of food that were added were a baked potato and some potato skins. And it was about a week ago, or maybe 6 days ago, that I peeked in here, and I still saw remnants of those food items in here. So it was mainly because of that I decided not to feed at that time. And I can already see some remnants, wow, look at that, of the potato, the baked potato. And I can't remember if I busted it in half. Is that what this other piece is? Yeah, it looks that way. So it looks like these are both pieces of the baked potato. And the potato itself doesn't have so much action going on as the material directly beneath it. That's where all the worms are hanging out. And it seems to be a space that's sort of wedged right in between that potato and a piece of corn cob. Look at them. They just love being inside the middle of the corn cob. You can see them squirming in and out of the center of it. They really, really love the middle of the corn cob. So when they consume a corn cob, it seems that they do so from the inside out. And this is the cork that we continue to check in on in this bin, which is just a funny thing because it never seems to go anywhere. So here we are. We're going to just start extracting some of this stuff, some of this mango seed remnants. And I guess my main goal here is to really help this bin start winding down so that I can start driving it towards completion and harvesting at some point. So to that end, I'm trying to round up all of these slow composting food items that we just keep working around, and I'm going to go ahead and remove them from this bin. From this point forward, I will feed it only soft, quickly consumed food items. And what I'm going to do with all the stuff that I extract from this bin is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to move it outside. I'm going to use it to feed my outdoor worm bin. Granted, I did feed that outdoor worm bin recently. I did some weeding. I chopped down a bunch of weeds, and all I did was I hacked up those weeds and I threw them into that bin. So not what some people would consider a very exciting feeding, but the worms don't care. They're into it. They'll eat that too. I mean, they kind of they get a bonus down here when they get all these kitchen scraps, and they get all kinds of yummy melon and cucumber and delicious carrots and everything else. But the worms outside, I'm sure they're just as happy to be receiving all that leafy material from my weeds, because I did poke around in that bin recently, and I did see that the worms were starting to make their way up into that leafy material. They seem perfectly content to do so. And I'm not going to worry so much about extracting any worms from this food material as I pull it out, because that outdoor worm bin is big enough to house a few additional occupants. So these little guys will simply travel outside with their food and not be disturbed. They'll just be relocated into the outdoor worm bin. As you can see, the food is piling up pretty good over here. Got a fair amount of the slow composting food in this bin, and I figure since that outdoor worm bin is fairly new, there's going to be plenty of time in that bin for this material to get consumed over time. Alright, so yeah, this bin certainly does have a fair amount of old food items, slow composting food items. And that was the other reason I had sort of decided to skip its last feeding, because, you know, if they keep getting fresh, soft, easy to eat food, then they're just going to focus their attention on that stuff, since it's, you know, more accessible, and they're just going to keep shying away from the slow composting food. I can be entirely wrong on that. But I do want to have this material free of any large chunks of uncomposted food, so that I can start really treating it as, you know, nearly done and ready to be geared up for harvesting of the material at some point soon. So I'm just using my fingers kind of as a probe now to see if I can locate any more of these large slow composting food items. Here and there I do stumble on a piece of something. Now we're just going to kind of pick through here a little bit and disrupt the action, reveal a lot of the worms hanging out in the material. Let's see what we can locate down here on the side and in this material. What's this? A little chunk of something. So I think we've got the most of it. So, all right, I got this little tray here. I'm going to go ahead and start moving this food over. And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to include those two uncomposted potato halves. Should I? I don't know. But you might have also noticed that's also including the cork. So I think this makes it official at this point. If I don't want to have any slow composting or non-composting items in here, then that would also include eliminating the cork from this bin as well. So our little test is through, and I think it's fair to say that while cork might be an organic wood material, it's certainly the type of wood that doesn't break down very quickly so that the worms can make their way into it. It's probably the reason they use it to seal containers for years and years on end. Just probe around a little bit more and see if we can stumble on any other larger pieces of mango pit, shell, or corn cob. I think we've got the majority of it here. And, you know, as long as we're at it, I really can't account for where any of that slow composting food might be, so I'm going to also use this as an opportunity to sort of aerate all of the material in the bin a bit. Move things around, probe around. And here too, I seem to have like some large sticks for some reason in here too. I'm going to treat those as slow or non-composting items that also get taken out. And let's also just give this edge a little quick check through. Okay, because now that we've removed the majority of that type of stuff, I think it's fair to say at this point the only remaining stuff in this bin is more or less finished vermicompost. It's true that when we were removing those food items, we did stumble here and there on some bedding, some cardboard that we saw that was in the feeding zone. I'm going to treat that as fast composting material that doesn't need to be removed, so that can remain. But other than that, I think we've gotten the most of it. This looks like it might be like an old chestnut shell. So you can see there's a nice healthy, good-sized population in this bin. And I think it's probably beneficial to have aerated the material like this and give the really damp stuff that was right down in the middle in the feeding zone sort of a chance to come up to the surface and get a little bit of air. And we'll just sort of agitate the whole batch around so that before we add in this next feeding, we can, oops, we can also use that as a chance to do sort of a final probe through the material to find any other little sticks and hard items that might also qualify as good candidates to be removed from the material. All right, I think we're doing pretty good here. Except, you know, here I am once again, getting distracted by my worms and my beautiful compost, and taking probably a lot more time to do this than is necessary. So let's try to cut to the chase at this point and get things set up for what I think might be a good idea, which is to get this stuff into a horizontal migration mode. So in the past, I've activated my horizontal migrations early, within a couple months of the bin start. But I think in the case of these bins, it did, you know, I was sort of getting to a different mindset on horizontal migration, which is that there's not a lot of purpose in, you know, moving the feeding zone around continuously. So I made a conscious decision on these two newest of my red wiggler bins to simply feed down the middle and reserve the horizontal migration setup to the very end when it's really time to try to encourage the worms to depopulate the material, to work their way into a place where they can easily be scooped out and relocated, and hopefully leaving the finished compost behind. So that's what I'm going to do here. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to set this bin up, not with just a fresh feeding, but also with the first try at initiating the depopulation of the finished compost with a horizontal migration. So I'm actually moving everything over to the far side over here, piling it up so that so that I can set up a fresh feeding zone right down in here. And hopefully that's going to be a spot that the worms are drawn to, since this material really doesn't have any food left in it now that we've plucked everything out of it. I mean, granted, there's probably still little scraps of food here and there, so there might still be enough to, you know, keep them interested and keep them fed in this material for a little while. But eventually I believe that they're going to need to start working their way over into the new feeding zone to continue finding fresh food supplies. But as you know, if you've watched any of my videos in the past, I like to sort of set up a little bit of a barrier between the finished compost and the new feeding zone in these horizontal migration setups. So I need to go fashion a piece of cardboard for that purpose, which I didn't really come prepared for this. Shouldn't take long. I've got cardboard right over here behind me, so I'm going to go ahead and fashion a piece of cardboard we could use as a barrier wall in here, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I've readied a couple pieces of cardboard, one for this bin and one for the other bin that we're going to do the same treatment to. So let's go ahead and start setting this up. There we go. And the size of it, you know, I'm not sure what size I should make it. I like the idea of having a maximum surface area so that each of these holes that I created, these punctures, is a potential place for the worms to make their way across, as well as around the sides and underneath. So I like the fact that I'm piling it high like this, but that also means I need to sort of pile things high a little bit on this side too. So that's fine, it doesn't matter. We're going to do this sort of proportion, kind of a 40-60 split. And we'll lay down some fresh bedding here in the form of cardboard in the new feeding zone. I wouldn't want that stuff to in any way become an obstacle to prevent the worms from making their way through. With that in mind, I'm going to use leaves right on the edge there so that the very edge of the feeding zone doesn't have anything that could potentially obstruct any of those holes that are meant to give the worms an easy way to traverse the barrier and make their way into the new feeding zone. So we'll start like this, a little bit of leafy matter right there on the edge, like so. And then we're going to start plopping in some of this delicious fresh food for them. Okay, so as you can see, it's a wide variety of celery, carrots, cucumber, lettuce, mushrooms, tomato, broccoli, you name it. All kinds of good stuff in here. On top of which we're going to put some stuff that makes for good bite-sized feeding for them. Coffee grinds. Another thing that's always useful to the worms is grit. So we'll make sure we include grit with that nice generous portion of food that we've given them. And then we'll use leaves to cover up the feeding zone. That's mainly to prevent any flying insects from taking a shine to the food that's been put here for the worms. Now, just sort of try to jam this barrier wall up against the new feeding zone, then we'll just backfill it up right up to the edge, right up to the tippy top with this finished compost. And try to level things off, only because I like to sort of use the top being level as sort of an indicator of where certain things are, because I'm not expecting the level of this compost to drop much at this point. Although maybe it will with all those worms moving out, who knows. But I think it's more to see how much the feeding zone has dropped, since right now they're pretty much at an equal level. Stuff is a little bit more damp than I typically like to see. So hopefully now that the weather is sort of drying out a bit, it's not as humid as it's been lately. Maybe this material will start to dry off a little as well. Um, so maybe, I don't know, I'm even thinking of maybe leaving it uncovered, maybe covering only the feeding zone. Give this stuff a chance to air out, dry out a little bit. I don't know, whatever. Let's cover this thing up and get to work on the next bin. We're going to do the same thing there. All right. All right, now that leads us to the second bin that needs the same treatment. Here, we are in a slightly larger bin, slightly more space in it. It's a wider container. Just wondering how this is going to do. It's not going to reach all the way to the edge, but that's okay. You might have sensed that I was kind of winging it a little bit the last time because I had intended to feed, that's for sure, but I wasn't totally set on doing the horizontal migration setup the way I did. So I kind of made that up as I went along, and it did seem like the sensible next step for a bin that's at this stage. So we're going to be doing the same thing here, but now that we are no longer winging it and we have a better sense of what we're trying to accomplish, we should be able to move along at a more brisk pace. So just like before, we're going to start gathering all the food that's in this that's such that we can qualify it to be a slow composting food item. If it's a part of the last feeding, such as that baked potato, then I don't know, we can possibly leave it. Maybe we'll just remove it. Maybe we won't even see it in here. Although I think I'm starting to see signs of it already. So there's the big baked potato. Not quite eaten yet, but with a fairly good sized population of worms hanging out right underneath it. So you can see that they are enjoying it. It looks like the potato skins that were thrown in here last time did all get eaten up because they were probably all small enough that they could be approached from all sides and gobbled up. Unlike this half of a baked potato that was thrown in here, where they can only make their way to the center of it by eating their way there. Mango seeds, very popular item. Always interesting to see how they break down as the worms start to consume it, because a fresh mango seed is so rigid that you could not bend it this way if it were freshly removed from the mango. Corn cobs, more mango seed. It's just these really, really slow composting items that have been in here for months and months that just take forever to break down. And given enough time, they will break down. But I do feel like I'd like to get this bin in the mode, as well as the last bin we just worked on. I like the idea of getting these sort of geared up for horizontal migration and eventually harvesting. Some of these little corn cobs are so tiny. I mean, it's not baby corn. It's just that they've whittled it down so much that there's virtually nothing left of it. Here's another piece of the potato. I believe each bin was allocated one potato in the last feeding 13 days ago. But I snapped the potato in half to make it a little bit more accessible to the worms. But yeah, you can see it seems like it's a very slow moving item when it's an entire potato or just half of a potato, where they've only got access to it from the outside surface. Seems like we've got this end of it pretty much taken care of. It's part of a mango shell, mango seed. I keep calling it mango shell. The seed of a mango shell. The shell of a mango seed. Here's one that's not yet been infiltrated, or at least it doesn't seem that way. Maybe it is. Try to crack it open to give them access to the inside, which is what they seem to like the best. It's coming out. It's coming out with all the rest of the similar food items. Okay, well, I think that's a pretty good effort put into trying to remove all these slow composting food items, and we've got a nice, pretty good sized tray full of mango pits and corn cobs, and that'll be a nice feeding for the outdoor worm bin. Even though they don't necessarily need food, there is a large number of worms out there, so I think this stuff will actually be a pretty good supplement to the leafy material that they've been given up until now. All right, so we're going to just do what we did previously, is we're just going to give this entire bin, all the material in the bin, sort of a chance to be aerated and crumbled up a little bit. I feel like I've gone pretty thoroughly through the material and picked out all the stuff I could find, so hopefully we won't stumble on too many more slow composting food items. And this is definitely a larger bin than the last one we worked on. And there's a little bit more material for me to sift through. As far as moisture is concerned, this material has a similar kind of a moisture content as the stuff in the other bin that we just worked on, so this stuff could also benefit from having some time to air out and dry out. So I think there's a good benefit to sort of injecting a nice fresh dose of air into the material throughout. All right, I think we've more or less accomplished what we're after in terms of extracting the slow food items and aerating all the material. And now we'll just excavate a new space for the horizontal migration feeding zone. I would say proportionally speaking, we're about at the same sort of maybe 40%, 60% ratio here, because I do want to have a big enough sidewall here so that all of these holes that I punctured onto this can be exploited by the worms as they start making their way up against it. So we'll set this up here like so, and we'll begin establishing the new feeding zone. And we'll get the new feeding zone set up just the way we did in the last one. We're laying down some cardboard bedding, but not right up on the edge, because right up on the edge, to make it more accessible and so as not to have any large pieces of cardboard obscuring any of the access holes that we've punctured, we're going to use a slightly more granular material as bedding here, which is leaves. Very nice. Now we're just going to go ahead and we're going to dump the remainder of the food that I bought down here to feed with today to set up these horizontal migrations with. So we'll plop that in right there and level it all off. Same kind of variety here. You can see all similar food items here. Cucumber peelings, carrot peelings, tomato pieces, whatever else just happened to make its way into this little collection. So let's add grit, because we know that always helps, and we'll dump out the remainder of the coffee we've got here for this feeding. This does sort of feel like a little bit more of a generous feeding than the last bin got. But like I said, this bin is a little bit larger in size, a little bit wider, a little bit, I'm assuming greater population of worms in here. Probably a greater amount of material over on this side as well. So I think proportionally speaking, we probably got something comparable to what we just did on the other bin as well. So now, like we did before, we're going to try to make sure that all this finished compost is more or less touching the barrier so that the worms can easily find the holes that will give them access to the new feeding zone. And we're just going to try to set it all up here so that everything's more or less level across the top. But I think we're more or less done. This is what we were after. We'll just cover up over here and get the container back up on the shelf. And I'll also tend to moving all of this recycled old slow composting food. I'm going to go ahead and drop this in my outside bin, so there's not much to see with that. I'm not going to bother filming that. I think just the check-in on the old horizontal migration that's happening on my two older bins that we looked at in the very beginning, as well as taking a look at how we're setting up the new horizontal migration on these bins is adequate for one video. So why don't we wrap up with that. Hopefully you enjoyed the video, and if you did, you know, I always appreciate it if you just give me a quick thumbs up and show that you liked it by hitting that thumbs up button, give me a like, and also consider becoming a subscriber to the channel. That's always really appreciated as well. So hopefully we'll see you guys back here next time. Thanks for watching. Bye everyone.